This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Khannam.
And I'm Jamal Dajani.
Jamal, we have a great show today. There's so much to cover. It's going to be a little bit more Palestine and probably Jordan focused today, although we will touch on the pandemic in some interesting ways. Just for our listeners and viewers, about 20% of people in the United States have gotten at least one vaccination shot so far. So we're making some progress here in the U.S. Unfortunately, the mutated variants, especially the UK variant, is spreading pretty much out of control. So we're in a race, Jamal, between getting vaccinated and the mutations that are coming out. And we're learning that 1 out of 4 Americans still have vaccine hesitancy. But with that in mind, it's kind of interesting. There's been a lot going on in the Arab world, especially in the United States, perhaps one of top 2 allies in the Arab world, Jamal. Jordan went through kind of it's not fair to call it a light coup d'etat, not even close. But the king of Jordan arrested his half-brother, or put him under house arrest with 20 other people. And it's kind of an interesting story that hasn't made it much in the mainstream media.
Yeah, I mean, it made it to the mainstream media, but we didn't see a lot of analysis. And of course, I wouldn't be too shy to say that this was an attempted coup attempt. We don't know. I mean, that's the question. That's pretty much the title of our show, whether this was a royal family feud or an attempted coup, because we don't have all the details. We've had on the show award-winning journalist Daoud Kuttab, and we'll watch him in few seconds, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. But first, let's go to journalist Daoud Kuttab. Former Crown Prince Hamza was put on house arrest on Saturday and warned to cease talking to disaffected tribal leaders and others in Jordan who complain about the kingdom's current state of affairs. According to some reports, at least 15 others accused of undermining security in Jordan were also arrested. It was announced recently that Prince Hassan, the brother of former King Hussein and the uncle of King Abdullah and Prince Hamza, had helped settle this rare public dispute. Are King Abdullah's troubles over? Is this just a family dispute? And are there regional players trying to destabilize the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan? Joining us from Amman, Jordan, award-winning journalist and former Ferris Professor at Princeton University Daoud Kuttab. Welcome again to Arab Talk, Daoud.
Thank you, Jamal.
So Jordan is hailed for its stability in the Middle East. This latest rift between two brothers unnerved many. How serious is the situation?
Well, it's not a joke. It is truly a family feud, albeit a royal family feud that includes the king and his stepbrother. And as you said, thank God, it's been settled by the mediation of their uncle. But as you said, Jordan is strength is its stability. It's a pillar of Jordan's continuity and development, and any attempt to shake this stability brings to point the entire raison d'etre of Jordan. The whole Jordan success story is because it's a stable country. So if that ability is taken, it's a problem. That's why I predicted it would be a very short crisis, because Jordan cannot tolerate a long crisis between the king and his stepbrother.
There was a difference in the tone of initially of the tone of Prince Hamza in the video that went to the BBC, and then there was another recording that he was saying that, and I'm quoting here, "No one can stop me from talking to my people. And then in the letter itself, where he pretty much renewed his allegiance to his brother, what caused
and the Crown Prince Jamal and the Crown Prince.
And the Crown Prince. So what caused this? What caused this change so quickly?
Well, I mean, the problem was started by the security forces, probably with some direction from the palace, and it ended when they climbed down a tree and the king assigned Prince Hassan to resolve the problem. So I think the letter that he signed does not include that he will not talk to people. So he got what he wanted, which is a continued freedom to talk to whoever he wants. And I think the country got what it wanted, which is the return to stability and normal governance.
So, some names were thrown around, and I wanted to kind of have you help us dispel some of the rumors. Sharif Hassan bin Zaid, he's a member of the royal family, and Bassem Awadallah, who was director of King Abdullah's office in 2006, were also arrested. Some reports have been linking them to the UAE and Saudi Arabia and other countries. Are these just rumors, or do you feel that there were foreign, regional, or even just foreign intervention that kind of created this dispute?
Well, this case is under investigation, Jamal, and there is a gag order against any information about what's happening in the investigation. I personally don't know anything about the investigation, so I can talk because I don't know anything. But I don't think that there is really any serious external effect. Saudi Arabia was one of the first countries to speak out in support of King Abdullah. The Crown Prince MBS called the king and called the Crown Prince. A delegation today is visiting Jordan to ensure that the Saudis have nothing to do with this case. The Emiratis the same. So I don't think that there is an international community at large always sent telegrams of support. So I don't think that there is a problem here. I think the issue is whether there is any serious information which we don't know, or whether this was part of an elaborate scheme that had long-term expectations. We don't know. That really we don't know. But there are a lot of people who are skeptical about this connection because they've never seen the prince ever with Bassem Awadallah or Sharif Hassan. They've not been involved in politics in the last 10 years or 15 years. So that whole thing seems a bit unclear.
Adding to, and I don't want to put you under the gun here, but adding to this string of rumors, you had the incident when the Crown Prince Hussein, who wanted to go visit Al-Aqsa Mosque, and then of course he didn't go because Israel wouldn't allow him to bring his security with him. And then in retaliation to this, Benjamin Netanyahu was on his way, or was about to fly to Jordan in a helicopter to go to the UAE for a photo op, and then he was prevented from flying there. So now we see in this midst the Israel equation. Do you see anything from that end?
Again, we don't know. We have not had any information. The Deputy Prime Minister Ayman Safadi said that there was a phone call made to the wife of Prince Hamza, and the person calling from Europe offered to provide them with a plane and a home in Europe. Now, it turned out that the person who made the phone call came out. He lives in Europe, and he's a former Israeli. Some people said he was Mossad and not Mossad. None of this is known. We don't know. And so, without real knowledge, it's all speculation. But I personally really put a big question mark. I mean, the phone call was made after the house arrest was made. And it was according to the guy who made the phone call, he said it was a simple offer to help the family. But the fact that he was a former Israeli was not very good optics.
Tell us a little bit about now the relations between Israel and Jordan, because it seems that it has soured quite a bit recently.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the relation between Israel and Jordan. I would say the relation between King Abdullah and Netanyahu has been very sour. It's been sour for the last so many years, and the king has refused to take a phone call or meet with Netanyahu. The Jordanian officials, including the foreign minister and others, have met with the blue and white team of Benny Gantz and Ashkenazi, the foreign minister, and the defense minister, but they continue to refuse to meet with Netanyahu. And Netanyahu's, tried to put his fingers in this case by, making stupid claims. Sorry to say, but I don't think people take Netanyahu seriously anymore.
Moving to another topic, since we are on these kind of topics about the leaders of Jordan now in Palestine, Palestinian officials on Monday insisted that President Mahmoud Abbas is in good health and his trip to Germany is for routine medical checkups. First, is President Abbas in good health, and will his absence impact preparations for holding the parliamentary and presidential elections scheduled for May 22nd and in late July, respectively?
Look, they say that 2 years ago he did an operation and he's doing a checkup. I don't know how much I would give credence to that. The fact that he had to fly by helicopter rather than normal way of going. Now, of course, there's COVID and the bridge and so on. So I would be a bit worried, but he's 85, 86 years old. He's not a young man. So, but elections are still on track. There's no reason for the elections not to take place.
So you actually believe that this is not another, false startup, because this happened in the past. Elections were put in place, they were announced, they were publicized.
We've never gone this far. No, we've never had gone this far of a presidential decree, announcements of the delegations, and so on. So no, I don't think that this is a game. No, this is a serious effort to have elections, and I think if they're cancelled, it would be a big problem for the Palestinian Authority. If they would cancel, it would be a big blow to their credibility.
So tell us about the elections. I mean, you have now for the first time a kind of people are breaking away from Fatah, forming their own, coalitions. And then at the same time, I was looking at, there are very kind of strict rules, who can run and who cannot run. And if you served in the government, you must resign first before you run. As you know, right here in the United States, you can run for elections and then you resign if you win. But now people have to resign first, which means they lose their income. And also there is age restrictions and all kinds of restrictions. I mean, is this, because, it said the elections are going to happen, but they don't seem to be in a way serious to allow for any challenge for the status quo.
Well, the age issue is 28, which actually is better than many countries. And they were hoping to bring it down to 25. They didn't. The resignation is not new. What is new is that your resignation must be accepted. So it's not only that you have to resign, but your leader or whatever has to accept your resignation, which means, as you said, the resignation will have to be complete. I think, to be fair, I think they're trying to make sure the people who run are serious about running and they are going to be dedicated time and so on. And still, we have 36 different lists that are running, and you have to pay $20,000 to run. Mm-hmm. Not cheap. $10,000 is not. You don't get it back. So it's not a joke, and yet many people are thirsty for having a voice, and that's good news. And I think it's very positive for Palestinians.
So, assuming everything goes as planned and the elections are held, and talking about now about the presidential elections in July, who do you feel is emerging as a real challenge to President Mahmoud Abbas?
One guy, Marwan Barghouti.
He's in jail.
He's in jail, but his wife is number two on the Nasser Qudway, a former Fatah Central Committee member. And it's a very interesting list of civil society people, independent people, and how they will do in the legislative elections will be important, and whether Fatah will nominate Abu Mazen Mahmoud Abbas or Marwan Barghouti will be a big question mark, because that will determine a lot of the future of the Palestinian movement. The fact that Abu Mazen might be sick actually might play into the hands of Marwan Barghouti, because nobody else has the credibility with people in the street than Marwan. Now, you are right, he's in jail, and there's different discussions whether there should be an amendment to the law that allows for president and a vice president, so that in case Marwan is in jail, there would be a vice president who would run things until he is out of jail. So, things are complicated. And of course, the issue of Jerusalem is very complicated. And today, the Israelis banned a preliminary meeting about elections in Jerusalem, arrested a woman and then released her. So it's not clear how the Israelis will react. The Oslo Accords make it very clear that Palestinians in Jerusalem are allowed to run in the elections, but the Israelis have always looked badly towards anybody in the united Jerusalem, which is their unilateral unification of Jerusalem, to run for the elections.
Well, things are going to get even worse for Palestinians and for Jerusalemites with the composition of the Israeli government, which has drifted to the far right. Now you have Kahanists who are going to be in the Knesset, sworn in the Knesset. So how do you think any even idea about working this out, if Marwan Barghouti wins, Israel's not going to let him out, and then two, how will they relate to any Palestinian government going forward?
A lot of the members of Knesset were Kahanists before there is actually an official Kahanist list, so I don't pay much attention to that. The problem is that it's not clear who's going to form the next government, and it seems that the very small Arab Palestinian party of Islamic tendency has a chance of being a kind of a kingmaker, and that's quite interesting to see how this will align with the fact that, as you said, there's also a small but very vocal racist party that is going to be in the Israeli Knesset. Palestinians have to work and worry about themselves. They need to be unified, and now they're divided. So I would, advise to pay more attention to a national unity than to worry about the Israelis at the time being.
Daoud Kuttab, thank you for talking to us.
Alan Jamal, hi to San Francisco.
That's award-winning journalist Daoud Kuttab giving us his analysis of we'll have to wait and see, right, if it was a true coup d'etat or not. What we do know is that there's a lot of interesting things going on in the royal family. And this battle between the king and his half-brother has been going on for some time, it seems.
Yeah, and then just to give you an update and give our listeners an update, since we spoke to Daoud Kuttab, King Abdullah of Jordan issued a statement, and he said, and I'm quoting, "Nothing can come close to the shock and the pain and anger I felt as a brother and head of the Hashemite family and as a leader to this dear people. This is a statement that was issued on Wednesday, basically 4 days after Prince Hamza was detained. King Abdullah said that his brother, and I'm quoting here, was at home under my protection. You could interpret this as at home, under my protection, and that the former heir to the Jordanian throne had offered him his loyalty. So these belated remarks did little to me, to tell you the truth, to mask the most serious public rift that I've witnessed in the ruling family during the past 20 years. There were no clarifications or official clarifications of what really happened, and a lot of talk, and I'm leaning that way, of foreign government intervention that backed the coup. And this is something, and even I think Daoud Kuttab didn't want to go too much to talk about it. Just at a time, we're speaking to him, and he was in Amman, Jordan. But listen, King Abdullah has of course, came to rule the country after the passing of his father, King Hussein. And at the time, after he became king, his half-brother Hamza, Prince Hamza, became the crown prince. And then after that, a while after that, he decided to remove him and appoint his son, Prince Hussein. And we haven't heard much from Prince Hamza. In 2018, he issued a criticism that saying there was corruption in the country, but really very, very little. He had very little to say. And I find the timing not coincidental, to say the least. Just before this happened, Jess, the relations between King Abdullah and Benjamin Netanyahu deteriorated very fast.
Significantly, right.
And the latest incident, the crown prince, his son, Crown Prince Hussein, was supposed to fly to Jerusalem, to Al-Aqsa Mosque, and he didn't go because the Israelis wouldn't let him bring his own security, even though King Abdullah is in charge of the compound. It's under Jordanian, basically, sovereignty. Israel does not recognize this, but so he didn't go there. And then following to this, Benjamin Netanyahu was to take a helicopter to Amman and then hop on a private plane that was sent to him to go to fly to the UAE for an auto op. And for the very first time, I can't recall other times that the Jordanian government did not give permission for the helicopter.
It was delayed. It was technically, the way they framed it is that they delayed it until, unfortunately, the ceremony was to take place. But it's a big slap in the face to Netanyahu from the king.
Then we find out, and I don't know how much, I can put trust in this, but a so-called, I'm going to say, a so-called Israeli businessman, his name is Roy, I think, Shapnik or something like this, offered to fly out Prince Hamza, to safety. All of a sudden, and then he says, "Oh, and by the way, I'm not a member of the Mossad. I'm not part of the Mossad, but we find out that he actually, these are communications that were intercepted. So this is where I see the Israeli meddling hand. We also cannot discount the meddling of Saudi Arabia, even though Saudi Arabia categorically denied any involvement and described these claims are nonsense. And the Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan flew to Amman on Wednesday to meet the Deputy Prime Minister Safadi, basically to express complete solidarity with Jordan's King Abdullah and his government. So a lot is
But you know, Jamal,
unknown about
it's-
this?
It smells funny. There's something that smells funny about this because I think you're exactly right. The timing is very interesting. All of the additional information you put forth was interesting. I thought Prince Hamza's videotaped, plea to the world, basically to summarize, again what the prince said in his video message. I'm paraphrasing, basically saying how can it be a problem if all I'm doing is just voicing gentle, thoughtful criticism about some of the problems that we have in Jordan right now, and yet he's under house arrest. 20 people were arrested that were close to the prince, so this is kind of a big deal too, Jamal. And of course, the Israeli connection can never be underestimated in their chronic attempt to destabilize, the region in general. So I still think you're right. There's a lot more to the story that we don't know, and I'm sure we're going to find out more.
Just in my opinion, it has all the markings of a foreign intervention.
Well,
And
outside of the outside of the Israelis and the Saudis, do you suspect anyone else? Do you suspect UAE or Bahrain to be involved in this at all?
No, those are the big players really regionally, and I suspect the Israelis more than the Saudis, but it does not mean that both of these countries did not cooperate on this. The timing is very suspicious.
It is.
This is a time when Jordan is suffering from COVID, lockdowns, high unemployment. And so they feel whoever plotted with Prince Hamza, I mean, yeah, sure, you could criticize your own brother, you could criticize the government, but the timing when the country is, it's very weak in essence to kind of come up with this plot.
But some people would argue, Jamal, that that's the best time to plot a coup when the government is weak.
Well, that's why I said you plot the coup, but Prince Hamza wouldn't have been able to do it alone.
No, not at all. He would need outside. He would need outside,
financially outside. So that's where I say, I'm leaning more towards that. This is not just like a passing family feud, and this was more of an attempted coup that failed.
Well, I tend to agree with that analysis, Jamal, and I think that when will the King Abdullah realize that his so-called peace treaty with the Israelis actually means very little to nothing, and that you actually have a peace partner who is attempting to overthrow your leadership in your country, should send a very strong message to King Abdullah. I'm hoping he'll take it seriously.
You're listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM, and on the topic of Israel, Jess, the chairman of the far-right religious Zionism party, lawmaker Bezalel Smotrich, wrote on Wednesday that he'll make sure that Palestinians, he doesn't call Palestinians, he just says Arabs, who don't recognize the Jewish people's legitimate rule over the land of Israel, will not remain here. I mean, this is not the first time, and he said that, by the way, his comments came on the eve of the Holocaust Remembrance Day. And of course, Smotrich was born in Haspin. This is a settlement in the occupied Golan Heights.
Exactly.
To remind our listeners.
Exactly.
And grew up in the illegal colonial settlement of Beit El in the West Bank. He's a disciple of Meir Kahane, and we've talked about Meir Kahane last week and all his disciples now who are ending with seats in the Israeli Knesset or parliament. This just gives you a picture of what what government we are looking at and what leadership we're looking at in Israel.
Well, that's exactly right, Jamal. And I think along the theme of weak governments right now, we are putting this in the context of what we spoke about last week, is that the Israeli government right now is extremely weak. They're facing a fifth possible election. They're unable to form a government. The president of the Israeli government, not Prime Minister Netanyahu, but the president has anointed and given Benjamin Netanyahu an opportunity to form a government. He's got a timeline to do that, and it's unlikely he'll be able to do that, at which point the opposition will be given a chance if he's unable to do it. But Benjamin Netanyahu has also started his corruption trial in the midst of all this. So you could make a very similar argument that the far right is extending or attempting to extend its extremist ideas, its kind of ethnic cleansing ideas as much as possible, while Benjamin Netanyahu is facing all these kind of difficulties, both in terms of his foreign policy, which is a disaster, as well as all the domestic problems. And on top of it, it looks like the Israelis are having problems with their Pfizer vaccine, Jamal. So things are a mess for the Netanyahu government right now. This could be one of the weakest points he's been at in many years. Now, we know we can never count Benjamin Netanyahu out, but he's in a very weakened position right now.
I don't know if he's in a weakened position. Actually, I might disagree with you. I mean, he's like, he looks weak because of the court case, but it looks like he might be the only option to form a government, or he will push the country to another election. I mean, he has managed to play this game, and,
right.
and he knows his supporters and he knows his audience, people like this guy, who, by the way, Smotrich also, I think in 2015, he went right on the Knesset floor, scolding the interior minister and others because he didn't want Israelis to sell properties to Palestinian Israeli citizens, because there was like a whole controversy going on in Ma'alot, in northern, that's a northern Israeli town where someone, a Palestinian Israeli, wanted to buy a home and he was denied, and others were denied. So he's courting people like him, Kahanists, people who advocate the expulsion of Palestinians. Those, I mean, as long as he keeps doing this. And
yeah,
the country
but
is
Jamal, we also know that he needs the Arab bloc to seal the deal.
Yes and no. I mean, he needs them now, but you also can have someone from the center, or if there is a center or the left, join his coalition, and then they will marginalize them. I mean, yes, he needs them now, but, there might be a shift. What I'm seeing is really the strengthening of the extremists. This is not to say that the current government is not extreme or past governments are not extreme,
but this is even more extreme.
It's getting worse. And so he basically wants to build a very far-right coalition, like the most that the country has ever seen, and this will ensure him to stay in power, basically.
Well, I think he's not somebody that can ever be counted out. I mean, he is, just like people were saying, be careful not to count out Donald Trump even after he lost the election. We have to say the same thing about Benjamin Netanyahu. Just along the lines of Benjamin Netanyahu, Jamal, and COVID and the Israeli situation, I read that story, which blew my mind, because despite the fact that Israel practices a very virulent form of medical apartheid, which is, illegal, immoral, unethical, where they will only vaccinate people who happen to be of, one religion and not the other. It's really ignoring 6 million people for vaccination is a grotesque form of medical apartheid at a time when they were getting these free and deep discounted Pfizer vaccines. We just read this week that the Israelis decided not to pay any of their bills to Pfizer for additional vaccines. It's kind of interesting.
That's right. So Pfizer halted a shipment of 700,000 COVID vaccines, which were scheduled to arrive on Sunday.
Right.
Okay, because Israel failed to pay the last, for the last 2.5 million doses shipped there. So they already received 2.5 million. They didn't pay for those. They sent them the bill, reminders, pending payments, etc. And they totally ignored sending the payment. And so now they said, we're not going to send the remainder. And Pfizer responded by saying, if you send us the money, we will send you, the remaining shipment. And it's kind of funny because I've been reading in the Israeli media, and the Israeli media outlet Army Radio was circulating reports that Pfizer staff were calling the country a banana republic, commenting on its political instability. And
that's probably being kind. I mean,
yeah, of course, Pfizer and Moderna, for that matter, and others did not take into consideration calls by many human rights organizations to basically hold shipments or to put pressure on Israel to vaccinate the remainder of the population that falls under its control. And we're talking about people who live between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. I don't feel sympathetic to Kaiser for not getting paid, because they're making this issue totally a commercial and it's about profit and whatever, rather than a humanitarian. I would have felt more sympathetic if Pfizer said, hey, we're not going to send you more vaccines if you don't vaccinate those poor Palestinians who live in the West Bank, 100 yards away from Israeli settlements.
Exactly, Jamal. Listen, Pfizer, Moderna, all of these biotech companies were warned, about the medical apartheid that Israel practices. They were encouraged on the international world stage, including by the WHO, to not practice medical apartheid and to vaccinate everybody that they are responsible for under international law. Of course, the Israelis ignored it, made disparaging comments. And the thing that I find so hypocritical, and I don't feel sorry for Pfizer either because of this, look at all the good press that the Israeli Medical Society and their vaccine plan garnered throughout the world, Jamal. They were getting, they were being held up as a model of the way to vaccinate populations and get this COVID pandemic under control. They were, celebrated and lauded in the media, mostly in the United States. I don't know to the extent, not as much in Europe, but they were held up as this model program. And of course, they didn't look beyond the hasbara and, the thin screen of their medical apartheid. And now, of course, Pfizer's going to pay the price. If Pfizer thinks that it's going to get paid, they better think twice about this. And if Pfizer had any kind of moral authority or ethical authority, they would say, just as you said, we will send you the vaccine after you have paid for it and after you agree to vaccinate the entire population that you are ethically, morally, and legally responsible for vaccinating, the entire population of historic Palestine. I don't think it's going to happen, Jamal.
No, it's not going to happen. And that's the sad thing about it. They made this whole issue about money and about profit and about payment rather than about humanity. We have a few minutes left. Jess,
Yeah, I want to make sure. I want to make sure we cover one thing really quick, Jamal. By the way, you know that the United States is going to release $150 million to UNRWA for Palestinian refugee support. I don't know if you heard about that, but that was just announced yesterday. Secretary of State Blinken announced that he believed that it was in the best interests of United States policy to let that money go, because the Trump administration closed down $150 million of money that was already earmarked for UNRWA and for basically humanitarian food, shelter, basic necessities of life for Palestinian refugees in Gaza and the West Bank. That was shut down last year, causing mass humanitarian problems. Looks like the Biden administration has overturned that. And of course, the Israeli ambassador made a very nasty comment saying, it's too bad that the Biden administration is making anti-Semitic decisions against the state of Israel for releasing that money. So,
these decisions, what he's referring to is to provide some health care to Palestinians, to provide food to children in Gaza. I mean,
exactly.
I read that. And also, of course, now members of Congress are giving Biden some resistance. I don't know all the details, how many of them and how many, but this is not going to sail through very quickly. I mean, the two things now Israel has criticized the Biden administration on. One is rapprochement with Iran to restart the nuclear negotiations, and the other one's giving money to a UN agency who basically houses and feeds and provides education and addresses medical needs of refugees. Those are the two things that they are in disagreement.
Well, because they believe that the authority that the United Nations, which is legally mandated to provide support to Palestinian refugees that were displaced in 1948 and 1967, there's a legal, let alone moral responsibility to take care of those refugees. Supporting them is being called anti-Semitic. And attempting to reestablish diplomatic ties around a nuclear deal with Iran is also seen as anti-Semitic. So my question for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and for the Biden administration, are you going to sit back and just take these ridiculous criticisms? What are you going to do about it? And you're right. I mean, two Republican congressmen, one from Idaho and one from, I don't know, some other state, who are looking to get reelected, obviously, are the ones who have put up the biggest fight against the UN, the release of this money to the United Nations Refugee Support Agency. So, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, which we should add that this is pittance compared to the $3.5 billion Israel receives,
plus,
and over $10 billion in loan guarantees, etc. I want to get to the last story, Jess, because we talked about this last week, and we're still watching the horrible images and the trial and the testimonies and witnesses, about the murder of George Floyd.
It's unbelievable.
I cannot ignore the fact that the U.S. media is ignoring making any connection of the tactics that the Minnesota police
Minneapolis police, yeah.
Minneapolis police used to murder George Floyd.
Yeah, they're Israeli tactics.
These are, because people are putting all these images all over, with juxtaposing what happened to George Floyd with Israeli police and soldiers kneeling on Palestinian necks. It's all over. Children's
necks.
And also the fact that officers from the U.S. police force basically received training in anti-terror tactics from Israeli law enforcement officers. At least 100 Minnesota police officers attended a 2012 conference
That's
hosted
right.
by the Israeli consulate in Chicago. And this was the second time that they've done something like this. There, supposedly they've learned the violent techniques used by Israeli forces as they terrorize Palestinians, under the guise of security.
You know what, Jamal? When you look at those images, those juxtaposed images of Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd for 9.5 minutes and murdering him, and there's no other way to talk about it as murder, first degree, in my humble opinion, first degree murder. And you juxtapose that against the long-standing, multi-decade tactics and techniques that the Israeli military and police have used against Palestinian children and adults, basically everybody who gets arrested, you can't help but make the connection. It's not just a visual connection that you have Derek Chauvin use an Israeli tactic on George Floyd. But there are other similarities. You were talking about, children and adults who are not resisting, Jamal. These are not, and George Floyd was not resisting. If you look at the 9.5 painful minutes of his slow, torturous death, he was not resisting. And yet the knee stayed on George Floyd's neck. You see the same process that the Israeli military uses. It's a form of torture and abuse, not to restrain, but to create and to intimidate and to create fear and potential death in the people that they're attempting to subdue. I agree with you. I can't imagine, and I don't understand why this isn't making, well, we know why, but we need to encourage and really do something to make sure that the media makes this connection.
Well, look, in an investigation, and we know that, especially in those prolonged trials. I mean, I think the first televised trial that I've attended was, O.J. Simpson.
Right.
And then you learn something that the investigators start digging in every aspect of the trial. Some evidence leads nowhere, others leads somewhere.
Right.
But this has not been a question when Amnesty International reported that hundreds of police from Florida, they named them, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California, Arizona, Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Georgia, Washington State, and Washington, D.C., all over the country have been receiving these kind of trainings. Thousands more have trained by Israeli forces who have come to the U.S. to host similar events to the one held in Minneapolis, the one I referred to earlier. And according to their report that that many of these trips were taxpayer funded, which
That's
should
right.
be also of interest to taxpayers. Right. Others were privately funded. We know since 2002 that the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Committee's Project Interchange and the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs have paid for police chiefs, assistant chiefs, and captains to train in Israel.
That's
and
right.
Not only in Israel, but also in the occupied Palestinian territories in the West Bank. They went to settlements to train inside settlements. I just cannot help not to think why there is a total cover-up and not trying to make a link to say that these tactics may be that police officers either have received training or watched videos of, have somehow made their way to be used right here in the United States against civilians.
Well, we are going to pursue this story, Jamal, to the extent that we can on Arab Talk. We have been talking about this, this form of abuse and torture and tactics that the Israeli military and police have brought upon the United States police departments and law enforcement organizations. And we know that ever since 9/11, that the coordination and training between the Israeli military and police departments and these U.S. departments of law enforcement that you mentioned have only increased. We have to dig into this.
And racial profiling at airports and so forth.
Exactly. Exactly. The racial profiling, the behavioral techniques of managing people, and all of that are Israeli techniques. And, the grotesque thing about it, Jamal, it's an abuse of power, of course. There's no doubt about it. But we have to keep in mind that the Israelis are also making money on this. So they're getting huge contracts. They're making money on this. They're getting Hasbara points from this, talking about how they're helping train U.S. police departments. But what has happened in the last 20 years, Jamal, is that we've seen an increased militarization of the law enforcement community here in the United States, which is a direct consequence of the collaboration that they've done with the Israeli military and police. The use of tactical techniques, the use of armored vehicles, tactical gear that they wear. The militarization of the police is a direct consequence of the collaboration with the Israelis. And, we need to pay attention to this.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to catch up on what you missed. You can download this for free online, and we'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.